Good evening and welcome to tonight's AWI webinar, Update on AWI Merino Lifetime Productivity Project. I'm Emily King, National Extension Manager at AWI, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's webinar. Before I hand over to our presenter, Geoff Lindon, I'm going to run through some very quick housekeeping. If you can't hear anything, although I suppose you won't be able to hear me saying this either, but hopefully the on-screen will assist. But you'll just need to click the upwards facing arrow on the audio settings button down the bottom left of the screen. And you will then need to check the audio output from the list under select a speaker. The ones you can see in your list will be different because these are my ones when I took a screenshot earlier today, but the list will look something like that. We have time for a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So if you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A box in the bottom middle of the screen. And then you can just type your question in the box at the bottom. As you can see written there under Welcome to Q&A in the top middle, your questions are just going to come directly to me and Megan, and they're not going to be seen by the other attendees. Thank you to everyone who asked questions when they registered. We really appreciate it. We received several questions on similar topics, such as the economics of the MLP data, when the results will be available, what impact the MLP data will have on industry recommendations, and many more. We've been keeping an eye on these as they've been coming in, and Geoff's been able to incorporate many of them into his presentation tonight. Today's presentation is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you later in the week so that you can follow up on anything or rewatch any parts that you would like to. And finally, of course, last but not least, there will be a chance at the end of today's webinar to provide feedback via a super quick survey. You can let us know what you thought of today and also what more you would like to hear from AWI. We really appreciate your honest feedback. It helps us to provide better and more timely information directly to you. And I wrote it, so I promise it really will only take a minute or two to fill in, promise. So, Geoff, I'll invite you now to share your presentation, please. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Geoff Lindon. Geoff is AWI's Program Manager, Genetics and Animal Welfare Advocacy, and he's the manager in charge of the MLP project for AWI.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you. I will mute and pop back in question time.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining this evening for this MLP update. The project started 9 years ago and we've just finished the data collection process. So thank you very much for joining in. Fair bit of information to update you about where we're up to. Just the first thing, there was just why the MLP project, and initially there were some concerns around selecting animals at younger and younger ages. You know, over the last 50 years might be compromising lifetime productivity and adult fleece weight. There was a need to better understand how these traits over a ewe's lifetime interact. While there was a reasonable amount of fleece lifetime data, there was a lack of reproduction data, and we've also got some newer types of merinos around, so the lower wrinkle ones. So we were keen to bring in a diverse range of types, and we really were looking at how can we enhance lifetime productivity through better assessments and better selection decisions at these younger ages, because that was not really going to change a great deal compared to the older times. And is there new technology around that it could assist us achieve that? So really the MLP is building onto the past to increase our collective knowledge. And clearly the visual assessment skills have built up over many decades, if not centuries. But slowly we've built up experience in the measured assessments as well, with a range of flocks over recent decades, and collectively they've all built up, then leading to the commercialisation of breeding values. You know, there was Wool Plan, Merino Benchmark, leading to AMSI and Merino Select. But there've also been changes on farm. Ram sheds were a while ago, but they did have an impact about what and when animals were being selected. two-tooth auctions brought a change in the late 70s and early 80s, where animals were started to be sold earlier and started to be supplementary fed more often. There was a push for early maturity with the swing to more carcass orientated types, but we've even ended up in recently with ram and ewe lamb joinings, where the selections have to happen really soon after weaning to get them up to a joinable age. So there's been a whole range of management issues on farm that have also played around an impact on our assessment ages. So there's been this collective build-up of knowledge that has been funded by your levies with MLA, with AWI, through taxes that have then gone to departments of ag and universities, and ram breeders through your own R&D that you've been doing on farm. So there's been multiple contributors, and so really MLP is playing a joint role in this wider picture. But there are some unique things about the MLP, and one was at the start off with the level of ram breeder involvement and engagement. And the first 2 years of MLP had the AMSI phase. So we had the site committees, heavy involvement, ram entrance, and we moved through the 2-year AMSI phase and then to the MLP phase. MLP was also, there was annual assessments, but we started younger than a lot of the other R&D trials. So at 8 and 9 months of age, we were collecting visual and measured data. We were collected them across a diverse range of types and ewe types. We were looking at lifetime performance, and this was also looking at lifetime of genomics. We've also got some new traits because there were some add-on projects, and we were looking at some quality confirmation traits, looking at fly strike, methane, foot rot, resilient and efficiency, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. But also what it gave us is the opportunity to reinforce some of the old outcomes in today's visual score and breeding value language that haven't been possible in the previous. So we'll be able to put them in the current language, modern language, with the old outcomes along with the new outcomes. So what is the MLP project? Well, it was a 10-year partnership, or still is, with AWI. Major partner is AMSI and the 5 sites. I mentioned that there's the 2-year AMSI phase and then the 4-year MLP phase. 134 diverse sires. We ended up with 5,700 F1 ewes out of those AI sires, and we looked at them for the 4 joinings. And the plan was to have 25 ewes per sire at the last joining, which ended up over the 22,700 joinings, and that was the trial design that at the start of the trial, Rob Wollaston arrived at to answer some of the questions that we needed. So we've now got lifetime data for genetic and for the economic analysis, and we'll be combining those together. A bit more about the sites. So there was Pingelly, Balmoral, Merino Link, New England and Macquarie, and many of you have seen this slide and a few of the other slides today before. So these are the sites, and thanks particularly to the site hosts and the site committees in the early days when we were doing the sire selection and setting up these trials. There was a lot of input from those site committees and the site hosts in the first 2 years, and then the site throughout the 5 to 6 years of each site. So thanks to them. What did we measure? We measured a range of visual traits. We took recorded classing and a range of measured traits. Genomics, we measured many of these on an annual basis, but body weight and condition score we measured 4 times a year. So the data collection was complete with New England, validated August 24. So we've now got more than 2 million records and a very valuable R&D resource. And while we were collecting this information, we did 7 podcasts. We've put out 18 newsletters. We've had 23 field days with over 2,000 attendees, 31 site reports that's downloaded, heading towards 12,000 times. And over the 9 years, we've had 33 beyond the bail articles. And then just last week, we released the MLP project breeding values. So we now move to the analysis, peer review and reporting stage. To date, we've produced 25 scientific papers, and they've been used the involvement of young students and more experienced postdoc scientists. So although this database is really giving them some experience as well. So we've planned for another 29 scientific papers for late 25 that are in the planning and analysis stage at the moment. So we've got about 8 months remaining of genetic and economic analysis ahead of the reporting phase that will then look to start late 25 and throughout 2026. And we'll do it by a range of industry webinars, seminars, and information on websites and beyond the veil, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. So now to some of the MLP highlights. And one of the highlights that we have to date is overall there are similar results for size bred with and without breeding values. And if we have a look at these indexes over here on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, here we have 35 size that came into the project without breeding values in the background. There were 99 size that came in with ASBVs. But here, if we look at the indexes, the indexes are reasonably similar, whether we look at the older indexes or the more newer indexes. But it's interesting to see that the ones without ASBVs get to these index points here in a bit of a different manner based on the trait performance. So the ones with no ASBVs, are earning quite a few index points here because of the high adult fleece weight. If we look at the performance of the 99 ASBV size, not quite so much points going into the index from adult fleece weight, but a little bit finer, and there's a bit more fat, bit more eye muscle, and a bit more weaning rate. So collectively they add up with similar indexes. They just get there in different ways. If we now compare to where we're up to with the Merino Select 2023 drop, and if we compare it with the ones with ASBVs, the MLP size with ASBVs, we can see that the 23 drop Merino Select have going up a little bit in yearling fleece weight, a little bit down or steady in adult clean fleece weight. So this is sort of part leading, part explaining why some growers are suspecting that there was a fall off in fleece weight. There's been quite a shift in fibre diameter. The size ASBV's size were minus 1.6, and now the 23 drops -1. So in terms of going up in the fibre diameter, you'd expect the adult fleece weight to have gone up. But also there's other reasons why it mightn't have done to the same degree, because the ASBV size were 0.1 on wrinkle, the 23 drop are now -0.4. So there's ups and downs happening, but we can also see a fairly strong lift in the 23 drop in terms of weaning weight. So a bit of a cap, the ASBV size are good on the visual traits, particularly the higher adult fleece weight. The ASBV size are better sort of in the non-visual traits and the antagonistic traits of worms and weaning rate and fat and muscle. And repeatedly when we're having a look at these size and how they've been bred and what they've been bred for is you get what you select for, and there's many size in both breeding philosophies that were good for a broad range of traits. One of the other highlights of the MLP today is there are high correlations between raw data, the project breeding values, and the ASBVs. Now, the MLP assessments were collected under pretty tight protocols. They were actually identical protocols with the visual and the measured assessments. But with breeding values, they get adjusted for the non-genetic effects. But clearly the raw data is still having a significant impact and dominating the breeding value. And we can see here that there's a 0.93 correlation between the MLP raw data and the breeding value for adult fleece weight. And it's 0.77 for adult clean fleece weight, 0.72 for adult weight. So the raw data is having a significant impact on the project breeding values. Another point of highlight of the project is classing is good for breeding objectives with emphasis on the visual traits, but more so at hogget and adult ages. And we've just shown you there how competitive the visual classing is in breeding size with productivity. But we're also asking the question, can classes also select animals that were more productive themselves for their lifetime? And so here, this is the Macquarie 2017 drop of the professional classing. And so the classer came in at post-weaner age at 9 months, out at hogget and at adult 2.5 years of age, and classed up according to the protocols, top 1%, 2 to 10%, 20 to 30%, 70% was the seconds, and the culls were the bottom 10%. So the classer came in and at a post-weaning, the animals that he classed into the tops, for the rest of their lifetime, cut 4.8 kilo, they were average 65, and they had an index for their lifetime of 104. But if we then look across to say, okay, how did the professional classer class the same 334 animals? How did they class those animals up at 17 months of age, and the ones that they put into the tops or the culls, how did they perform for their lifetime? And we can see here that there was a lift here in the indexes and in some of the production traits at 17 months of age. And then we can see also what happened at the A2. And again, the ability here of the classer, how they've graded those animals at 2.5 years of age, has really reflected well their lifetime performance. Now, this was the Macquarie 17 drop, but they are reasonably indicative of the other 9 drops. It was 10 drops in all. But the classer results did vary between drops, and this is, we had different size in each drops with different maturity patterns, different microns, different attributes in terms of their productive performance. There were 5 different classes. There were different ewe bases at each of the sites, and there were also different seasons. So some of the initial years were the drought years, and then we ended up in the wet years soon after that. So, but these 2017 Macquarie results, are indicative of the other drops and how the classes went in selecting animals for lifetime productivity. So this is just a bit of a recap, but generally the classes performed well compared to the visual indexes, but they were also selecting for wool quality and conformation traits that weren't in the indexes. There's a caution here about the post-weaner visual classing. The classing results generally were better at the hogget age and in the long wool. But in terms of the older age classing at 3, 4 and 5 year old, the classing at those older ages were picking up more of the wool faults, but care was needed that the animals that were the ewes that were producing a lot of offspring, lots of twins, weren't impacted for the classing. Just a point of note that in a few of the surveys that AWI has done, there's around 25% of wool growers don't class, 44% class their own sheep, and 31% use an external classer. But also one of the highlights of MLP is the measured assessments, are good for breeding objectives with non-visual traits and with numbers of antagonistic traits. And one of the things that we found out is, or it has been reaffirmed in the MLP, is taking 1 and 2 year old fleece weights really do improve the ability to get an accurate lifetime assessment of fleece weight productivity. One of the interesting things that post-weaner yearling, hogget and adult fleece weights are actually regarded as different traits because the correlations aren't as high as between the adult traits at A2, A3, A4 and A5. They're currently regarded as the same traits because the results are very similar between those adult ages. But here the performance at these younger ages are regarded as different traits. And here we can see within MLP, the fleece weight heritabilities are higher at the older ages. So it's 0.33 at post-weaning and it goes up to 0.54. So there's there's an accuracy about lifetime productivity, but also there's the ability to pick the generally superior animals for fleece weight, so they can throw that advantage onto their progeny. Within MLP, there were 15 sires that rose in ranking between the post-weaning age assessment and adult ages. 84 stayed about the same, and 35 sires fell in ranking between the early and then the hogget and adult ages. And these tended to be the early maturing lower equal types. So both, in the visual classing and in the objective assessments, there's a note of caution about 8 and 9 months data, but particularly sometimes where we see in industry where 8 and 9 month data may be coming from a part drop that has been measured. It might be coming from a 3-cycle lambing, and where maybe the protocols that are required haven't been followed, which then generates sort of a lack of confidence in some of these early age results. But as ever, there's a balance here about the need for good data at the older ages, but also with the economic realities of retaining animals for longer to get that good data. And it's invariably about finding the sweet spot, and that sweet spot will vary between breed types and environments. What MLP was able to do, and I think quite a few would have seen this slide previously as well, is the impact that genomics is having on the ability to increase the accuracies at younger ages in terms of reproduction. So over here, this is the size weaning rate accuracy with animals that just have pedigree. And here we can see the accuracy lift that we get if we add genotypes into the assessment. So a significant lift here in the accuracy of ewes when we have a genotype. But MLP is also playing a role in improving a range of other things to do with genetic benchmarking. We've got this merino genomic reference population with lifetime data, and a lot of the MLP data was entered from 2022 on, and the genomic traits, the merino select traits, have been genomically enhanced since then. And this has led to more accurate and stable early in life ASBVs, particularly for the reproduction and the adult traits. And some of the feedback I get from ram breeders is noticing the difference now that the genomics is having to the stability of these early life ASBVs. So that's good feedback. But the MLP also assisted with the creation of weaning weight trait, particularly in the early days. So Balmoral lambed first, and we needed the new weaning rate trait for it to more accurately reflect what was actually happening at that Balmoral site. So the new weaning rate traits really is a good advantage over the number of lambs weaned. But also the MLPs has assisted in the evolving of the genetic grouping strategies, and it's also been in part, there's other things involved, but in part it's led to rapid on-farm adoption of genotyping. So now in the current drop, more than 50% of the animals, the merino animals in Merino Select, have been genotyped, and I think this is reflecting on the outcomes of MLP that ram breeders have seen, but also the success of MLAs and of other projects around the genotyping. MLAs, recently brought out the Merino flock profile, and also or soon to, the Merino genomic breeding values. And again, that is opening genomics up to those breeders who haven't been specifically involved in breeding values. At the start of MLP, there were 9,000 progenies in Merino Select. That grew to 77,000. So there was a significant increase in the use of the semen of those sires that growers were seeing in the first and second year of the AMSI phase. So that improved linkage and the use of the sires that were looking good to ram breeders. MLP, gave assistance to the 2022 and the 24 Merino Select analysis and index updates. There was a modest increase in the emphasis of adult ages in 2024, and the next update is in 2026, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. The visual scores are updated with teats and udders and feet and legs on the back of a fair amount of the MLP data that had been collected. And the MLP is offering linkage between the Doonies and the Merinos, along with the Coonong Dooney trial, where one of the MLP sires is involved in that. And we've ended up with an ongoing R&D resource. MLP collected data in the early life effects, and these are how the animals, the ewes, scanned and how they reared. So whether they were scanned as single and reared a single, whether they were scanned a twin, or reared a single, scanned a twin and reared a twin. The MLP ran the twins separate to the singles, and the preliminary results we have for some of these early life effects in MLP are a little different to the default Merino Select adjustments. So further investigation is looking at why that might be, and there'll be more released on that in the next 6 or so months, leading into the extension phase in 2026. But MLP also showed that there was a large variation in ewe survival between the sires, and that was the ewes up to 4-year-old. The preliminary heritability is low, but at 0.06, but it's similar to weaning rate. It's favourably correlated with wrinkle, so as wrinkle goes down, survival goes up. And what we're having is redoing the analysis. So AGLU is redoing the analysis of ewe survival to take in the full set of data rather than just a 4-year-old. And it's interesting that sire valuation might also be able to add to survival data now that it's 100% genotyped. We've also found in the MLP project that there was a large variation in ram mating success. So these were the flock rams that were naturally joined for 2 cycles to produce the F2 lambs. And we were able to determine the pedigree and who the sires were by the DNA. And so this is sire mating success. This is progeny per sire per season. So here, Balmoral, the flock rams averaged 49 progeny at merino length. They averaged 50, Pingelly 51, leading up to New England, where the flock rams averaged 73 progeny. But if we look at how the bottom 20% of the sires performed and compared them to the top 20% of the sires, we'll see a significant difference. So the bottom 20% were still well behind the average, and the top 20% were well above average. And here you can see the largest, the sire that had the most progeny per season, and there was one in the New England that produced 231 progeny in one joining. So some interesting data there. We do know that from some other research that it's moderately heritable sire mating success. Anyway, we'll be able to look at this trait into the future as well. But MLP's also, built up a range of interesting facts. So we found out that foot pairing didn't bias future production, that the fat and weaning rate is lowly correlated, and that sort of confirms with a range of other data. So if you're interested in weaning rate, it's important to select for it. Looking across the sites, when we had the data, we couldn't find a clear reproduction selection strategy across the sites about, what happens if you culled dries or you lambed and lost once or twice or failed to rear twice. Because we had the lifetime data, we could see the consequences of what happened if you did that at 1 or 2 year old. And there really wasn't a clear strategy. And it might have had something to do with the fact that on average, MLP had 108 lambs weaned per ewe joined. The analysis also showed that, skin pigment at an early age is a good indication of lifetime pigment. We also found that the mid-side sample for yield is the best site, even in drought when there was reasonable amounts of dust penetration. And moving on to some of the things that the MLP add-on projects, some of the knowledge that we're building up there is there was a student, Erin Smith, at New England, and she looked at udders and the impact about how they ended up in reducing weaning rate and lamb survival. Also at New England with the CSIRO, we looked at resilience in a 2 phases of a project, and found that resilience is not correlated with the wool traits. But we found low unfavourable correlation with weaning and yearling and growth weight. We found a low favourable correlation with worms and dags, and fat wasn't significant with the resilience. With the methane, was a project with MLA, UNE and New South Wales DPIRD, and they were able to come in and test 4 of the sites. So there was 96 MLP size that were tested for methane, and we've been, they're still very early and we're needing more data, but we have found some unfavourable correlations with the indexes and body weight and fleece weight. So methane's going to be a tough trait to get progress on. But we were able to show that some of the high indexing animals did also have some good low methane production. There was a feed efficiency project that was contracted with Murdoch, and we were able to show there are 20 to 30% difference in whole body fat between the size at the same live weight, and it was actually highly correlated with carcass depth. So we don't actually need to move to another trait. We can use the carcass depth trait. But what we're looking at is what's the economic value of fat, what's the economic value of more moderate body weights, and there's a fair bit of analysis that's been done. We're coming to a conclusion, and we're looking to feed some of this information into the Merino Select Index review with MLA AGBU coming in 2026, and we're looking to see if we can move more to these indexes on a profit per hectare basis. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Another one of the add-ons that we did was anti-malarian hormone, and there are other species that when this hormone is assessed at young age, they have been an indicator of reproduction. But at the New England site and also at Centre Plus, we couldn't find much of an indicator at all between AMH and weaning rate. We've also looked at the impact of the 2 ewe bases at Macquarie. When we look at statistically, AGBU show that there's low re-ranking of the size, and it can be managed through the analysis. But when we look at the sire means and we look at the economic analysis and we look at the animals in the pens, we do sense that there's outliers. And often this is a bit because as breeders ending up looking at individual animals and making decisions on individual animal level. Geneticists are coming at it from a population approach, and so there's different ways. But I mean, how do we reconcile the difference? And I think the answer here is the need to keep progeny testing. And if we keep progeny testing, then where there is the the G by E and the re-ranking of sires, then keeping on testing the progeny is the way to address the issue. But there's more work pending on the impact of the G by E between these two ewe bases. What New South Wales DPIRD, with also CSIRO and MLA, also looked at eating quality and have found that IMF and shear force, and there were no unfavourable impacts on the wool traits. And while the IMF and the shear force traits in the merinos had been trending in the wrong direction in Merino Select, that now looks to be flattening. And MLA, added IMF and shear force into the Merino Lamb Index in 2024 to part address this issue as well. Foot rot was also another add-on project that we opportunistically tested the Pingelly wethers and assessed them for foot rot. We didn't quite get enough data to check whether the trait is the same as New Zealand. We need more Australian data. And so AHA and AWI have commenced a genetic foot health project. And I think a fair few of you on tonight are involved in that project. So we're looking to collect more data to see that we can bring out Australian breeding values for foot rot. So a little bit further to go there. In terms of the fly strike genomics, as the add-on, New England collected a fair bit of fly strike data, as has Burbage Farms have collected a significant amount of data over the last 4 or 5 years. But we've also got data from other R&D flocks, and also there's around 12 ram breeders that have got involved and providing data. So there's about 40,000 animals in the database. Project breeding values were released in January 2025, so earlier this year. And we've got a pretty good alignment with the indicator traits. So here you can see where DAG is having a significant effect on breech strike. Fleece rot is having a fair amount of impact on the body strike. And what we've been doing here is we've just been taking a genotype on an animal that's been struck, and then on a mate that hasn't been struck that's in the same management group. And then AGBO have done the genetic analysis and then come up with the correlations with these traits. So that's looking promising. And we'll move, as more data comes in, we'll be able to move the fly strike breeding values to research breeding values, and then on to then ASBVs once they reach accuracy thresholds. So the MLP analysis continues. AGBO is working on the full parameter estimates, all the heritabilities and correlations across all of the traits, and we'll be meeting with them early August to really flee through this detailed parameter estimates. But AGBO also, working on how we can better predict adult traits at the young ages and really starting to look at the maturity pattern. The economic analysis is ongoing with John Young in WA, and he's looking at gross margin per DEC, the profit per hectare analysis, how the correlations with these indexes, with prices that have, average prices for the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, how they've correlated with the indexes that we currently have. So some of the preliminary work that's coming through is pointing to the indexes could have a little bit more emphasis in terms of fleece value in them, but we're looking to get all of the analysis results from John and then have a look at them. But also John's looking at the cost of survival, and I mentioned before that we've got this significant survival differences between sires, but how do we put an economic value on that? The New South Wales Stud Trust, there's a project with Anne Ramsey that is looking at some of these sheep cluster outcomes that I alluded to earlier on, and looking at the costs of the visual and measured assessments versus the benefits. And Anne will also be putting some of the key messages, once we've collated all of the analysis, putting some key messages into ram breeders. So MLP is reinforcing some of the old R&D in modern language. It's shown how important having the right protocols for visual classing and measured assessments. It's showing how classing can be cost effective. That shows that breeding values work. It's also showing the importance of the raw data and getting the protocols right. It's highlighting again the need to set the right breeding objectives, set the targets, and getting the class and ram source to match. Showing the importance of selecting under a best practice commercial management. The importance of trying to keep management groups as large as possible for as long as possible. It's showing, that one-year-old assessments, they're a fact of life. We're not going to be able to get away from them, but we need eyes open to the limitations of young age assessments. Showed the value of the two-stage selection that's been around since the 1990s and the value of hogget and adult. The importance of progeny testing and the value of being able to assess and validate progress. So as we sort of move into the commercial communication and extension phase, significant adoption has and is already occurring. So there's a fair bit of input that went into the 22 and 24 analysis and index updates. And there's plans for the 26 and 28 Merino Select updates, the validation of indexes, the influence of early life effects, the emphasis of the adult traits, and the cost of these efficiency traits. As mentioned before, on-farm adoption of genotyping has been pretty rapid, and there's over 500,000 genotypes in the Merino database. All the ASBVs are now genomically enhanced since 22, and there's the new weaning rate trait. There's these new genomic products for those who are outside the ASBV system, and we're also looking at these new traits in fly strike, methane, foot rot, and efficiency. And here to get the adoption through that happened in 22 and 24 and then what's planned for 26 and 28, we're needing to work well with the MLA, the OVIS owners and AGBU to collectively all make that happen. So in terms of, we're needing the analysis to conclude, and we're needing to get all the information in and check all the messages to see that they're consistent, and then set up targeted messages for ram sellers and ram buyers and the 25% of wool growers who breed their own rams. And then what we've got to do is look at the pipeline. How do we then, once we've decided the key information that it's cross-referenced, that it's well-coordinated, then how do we get that information out? So it's more webinars, contact with classes and consultants. It's we're looking to have seminars at the sites, or close to where the sites that were involved in the MLP. But then there's a range of ram breeder and field days, meeting of associations and websites as the pipeline that will be getting this information out to levy payers. So reasonable amount of expenditures gone into past R&D, current R&D, the MLP, and then also on farm. And clearly the way to get a return on this investment is we need to be able to show that we're increasing production, we're reducing costs, and we're reducing risk. And here's a graph of the wool production index. You can see here where the MLP data and genotyping was submitted into Merino Select, where the genomic enhanced breeding values and where the analysis updates came in. And we'll be tracking this along with the other indexes and maybe new indexes to see, the impact that this will be having in 26 and 28. But we think that we can see an uplift here in the rate of gain. But we've also got to be looking at reducing costs and reducing risk. So reducing the risk is reducing the risk of wrinkle, of resistance, chemical resistance to worms, chemical resistance to fly strike. But then also reducing costs. How can we reduce the costs for ram breeders? How can we reduce those costs for commercial wool growers and get these production increases? So some take-home messages. there's the need for type management protocols for good classing and good measurement. Sheep classing works well for the visual orientated breeding objectives, and the ASBVs work well for the non-visual traits and breeding objectives where there's a significant input from these non-visual traits and complicated objectives. There's a value of measuring as old as possible, so that's maybe yearling rather than post-weaner. But it's also, displaying and promoting hogget and adult age fleece weights. So those animals that may look to have, a reasonably high yearling fleece weight and that are falling, then we're picking up those animals. So displaying and promoting the hogget and the adult fleece traits will then allow buyers, semen buyers or flock round buyers, the transparency around that and to put greater selection pressure in on the adult fleece weights while we're trying to push wrinkle down. But as I mentioned before, there's been this rapid adoption of genomics, and there's benefits now for all, whether you're in or outside of the ASBV system. There's the enhanced breeding values, which are adding value to and the accuracy to the adult fleece weight traits. There's the recent updates and the updates to come in 2026 and the 2028 around the emphasis on the adult traits, the emphasis on the efficiency traits, the value of the indexes, the emphasis on the index, which traits. There's new traits. Do we bring in the maturity pattern? There's linkage with the Doonies. And will genomics actually be able to help us substitute for some of the direct measures? Will genomics, in essence, be able to reduce some of the on-farm costing or on-farm costs? But we'll still need a really important genomic resource, and who and how we pay for that. Another key take-home message is, as we aggregate a lot of these messages through the end of 2026, and then we'll be looking to get these the results out more broadly in 2026. And there's also interest in right at the start of the trial and recently in some of the questions that we received around the need for an independent peer review, and we've given those commitments that we would look to do that. So there's a lot of organisations that have been involved in these add-on projects, and these are many of the logos of those organisations that are involved in the add-on projects. And then in the MLP project itself. So big thanks to AMSI, the sire entrants, the site hosts, the site committees, the researchers, and all the industry participants, all those who have gone to the field days, those who have adopted the outcomes that we've been able to release and show to date. Big thanks to the site hosts and the site committees, and a big thanks to Ben Swain and Anne Ramsey, who've ridden this project for the full life through the 10 years. Thanks, Ben and Anne, and thanks to the many industry participants who have been on the wave with us as well. So here is my email, geoff.lindon@wool.com. So please feel free to send any information or any feedback to me through that, but also then through the Q&A and the chat session that Emily's about to move to. So that's me done, and back to you, Emily, for questions.
Thank you, Geoff. Very informative, and plenty to chat about there. And we do have some good questions in the chat already, and we've got some more coming in. So I'll give you a second to take a quick breather and grab a little sip of water if you'd like one. Everyone keep whacking your questions into the Q&A box. We've got plenty of time to cover those. And whilst those are coming in, I'll just get another quick plug in for the very short survey. As the person who has to analyse this data for the company, I can tell you we do look at every bit of feedback we get. So please definitely do pop that in. It's really important to us, and in delivering more useful and relevant things to you, essentially, at the end of the day, as the levy payers. Okay, Geoff, ready?
We're good.
Okay. Okay, will there be information about which sires have performed well in which environments and over what type of ewes?
So yes, so the different indexes are based on different production systems with assumptions that go into those indexes. And so we will and have produced information about how those sires performed according to those production systems and indexes. One of the things that John will be looking at is how we can optimise what is the production system that best suits a sire. So that is part involved in the work that John's doing. But as indexes slowly evolve, there may well be some new indexes that come along that might better suit some ram breeders, sheep type, and their where they're wanting to take their business. So it'll be an evolving process of matching those.
Thank you. I think so. This came in fairly early on, and so you have touched on some of this throughout the preso. But can you please comment on what the future is of the merino genomic reference flock now that MLP project has finished?
Sire evaluation is part taking over from MLP. So there's around 5,000 progeny produced a year in sire evaluation, and we're genotyping all those animals. There has been a little bit of a dip in recent years with the tougher times, but we are looking to genotype all those animals. They're unselected, they're taken out to 2-year-old. Some of the sites have been getting involved in reproduction for one or 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that's adding value. But it really is sire evaluation taking over, providing the linkage. Ram breeders are getting additional linkage within the Merino Select database, but also getting linkage into the reference flock. So joining up in an inter-sire evaluation is an important way whereby you can keep your bloodlines well linked to the reference flock, and how we can keep the reference flock with the current genetics involved in it. Update.
Excellent, thank you. Peter Bradley also let me know MLA will continue to fund the MLA resource flock, which will collect meat science, growth and early on-farm traits. The merino sires represent 25 to 33% of the sires used. And as you just said, any merino producer that genotypes and phenotypes will be part of the reference population, as well as AMSI, of course. And Peter has mentioned as well that over 60% of the animals submitted into Merino Select each year have a genotype. So, okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, a question here. Why is there such a significant difference in fleece weights with visual classing over ASBVs? Is there a greater weighting on the non-visual traits with ASBVs?
So I think there's a range of reasons. One, I think the non-ASBV ram breeders have been tending to select fleece weight at older ages. So they've been tending to select more at 18 months and 20 months prior to joining. They haven't had the data coming in from the younger age visual assessments. So I think they do tend to select them a little bit later. So even if there are some breeding value young age, maybe post-weaner breeding values, they do put a little bit more emphasis on the visual fleece weights there at that older age. And yes, the Merino Select breeders, when you're using ASBVs, and you've got more traits in your index and more antagonistic traits. So as you add the more and more traits in it, and you get the progress in fat and in muscle and in worms and in wrinkle and in weaning rate, then something has to give a little, and that's fleece weight. But also Merino Select did adjust up their emphasis on the adult traits in the 24 index review, and it'll be reviewed again in 26. So I think it is as an important thing that that both ASBV and non-ASBV breeders take note of the value, mm-hmm. the repeatability and the heritability of assessments as 2-year-old versus 1-year-old.
Yep, thank you. Okay. MLPU seem to have run in pretty good condition score. Would this have impacted any of the relationship between fat and weaning rate?
It would be difficult to know. So yes, we've run them at LTEM standards, and even in some of those drought years, they were fed so well that they were actually a little bit ahead of the LTEM standards, and we tried to keep as much as possible that the MLP animals were at LTEM standards. But I think one of the things that can happen is that when you have animals in higher condition, then it is harder to see the better doer animals at the lighter condition scores. But I think in terms of specifically with the fat and within the weaning rate, what MLP is finding, the preliminary results that we found is really quite similar to other R&D flocks. So I think there's sort of a reasonable agreement there on that.
Super. Was methane assessed on a per kilogram of feed consumed basis or just on a per animal basis?
It was assessed on the amount of methane that was produced in the packs over a test period, and then the project has been looking at a range of ways that it would analyse and present the methane trait. So at the moment, and I'm talking on behalf of the other researchers, but maybe Daniel or someone else might like to add in who are the researchers involved. But because we're in such early stage of the methane trait, really a lot of the analysis is actually looking at what is actually the right definition and what will be the right trait moving forward. Because methane goes up, so your methane intensity can improve, you end up with more fleece weight, more lambs, but nonetheless the amount of methane per head goes up. Whereas, if the full idea is about, actually reducing methane, then you've got to actually reduce your head numbers to actually get the reduction in methane. So look, there's a lot of work going on into how to best define that trait.
Mm-hmm.
We have got some information in the most recent Beyond the Bale on the methane breeding value.
Excellent. And that's available at wool.com if anyone hasn't seen it yet. So I can, when we send out the recording to this, I can put some of those links in there in that email as well. Okay. Regarding culling ewes that don't rear lambs, is there any indication that a maiden who doesn't rear a lamb is more likely not to going forward?
When we looked at the 5 sites and we looked at both drops of the 5 sites, it varied. So there was a slight advantage at one to get rid of a maiden that didn't lamb. At the other sites, the maid that didn't lamb had more lambs the next year and almost made up. But given that the conceptions that we got and the number of lambs that we had, we didn't have many dries. There were lots of twins. There were very few animals that failed to rear twice. So the culling strategies were slightly different at the different sites of the different ram types, ewe types. There was no clear strategy common across all the sites, and the difference between culling strategies at any one site was marginal.
Yeah, thank you. Interested in your IMF and shear force. You have good merino population for measuring merino data, and there's good UWA and Murdoch data for comparing first cross progeny versus merino. with Merino outperforming. Can we cut through to market and talk about the Merino product and brand as a different quality meat?
Look, I really think that's an MLA question, or an industry question, rather than around the genetics of it. It is interesting to have a look at the Merino when you look at the Merino types, and so you look at the animals under -3 fibre diameter, that it's actually the superfines and the fines that have superior IMF and shear force. So there are some, really good eating quality Merinos. It's a matter of industry acceptance and adoption through the meat industry supply chain, and I think there's others better placed to answer that than me.
And probably a little bit back to what you said before as well about you get what you breed for. If you breed for it, you'll see more improvement in that in your animals.
Yes, and there has been good improvements in the prime lamb, where they've, lean milk yield was having some negative effects on IMF and shear force, and through the use of genomics, we've been able to turn that around, and they're able to improve lean milk yield and IMF and shear force. But that was in the prime lamb. But I think some of these things will now be able to happen with the Merinos, with the genomic information that is in on the Merinos.
Perfect, thank you. Were some of the rams entered in MLP because they were winners in the show ring? And if so, how did they go?
So yes, those 35 MLP sires that weren't bred using ASBVs, we did have an advisory committee that was looking around for some young sires that they recommended that we put in to the MLP. So yes, that was the case. And on average, those 35, their indexes were very similar to the animals that were bred with from the breeding values, but they get there in different ways. And there were animals that came, out of the show ring or didn't have ASBVs with them that performed well on structural faults, and ones that didn't, just like there were from the sires that came out of breeding values. So, there was diversity across all breeding philosophies, but they often just got there in different ways. But we were keen to get, to have some non-ASBV animals in MLP, absolutely. Of the 99 or so that were bred out of ASBVs, a lot of those were entered by entrants and paid the fee to enter in the AMSI phase. But we did also go out and get some sires that did have ASBVs, because we were seeking diversity, and that the breeders might not necessarily have chosen those sires themselves to go in, but we had a research purpose that we went out and got diversity.
Thank you. As a commercial grower, how does the MLP help me, and where will I be able to access this information?
So we've part got information out that I alluded to before, but we're really looking to consolidate the information in the next few months once we've got all of the bits and pieces in from the analysis. But one of the things that a commercial grower will pick up is if we can get added lifetime productivity into the animals that are being bred, if we can lower the costs of production through breeding more worm resistance, fly resistance, so there's less incidence of the disease, and there's less need to treat, and there's less risk of resistance of these chemicals, then we're looking to do that. But we're also looking to optimize the indexes as much as possible? How might we be able to reduce costs both at the commercial level and at the ram breeder level? So we will be, throughout 2026, trying to get as much of this information direct to commercial growers, direct to ram breeders and sellers, and we'll be using the multipliers. We'll be trying to go out through consultants, sheep classes, livestock agents, and hoping for them to help spread the message as well. But one of the messages for a commercial grower is, if you're interested in adult fleece weight, ask and be interested in those, how those traits are performing at the hog and adult age.
Excellent, thank you. That leads nicely into this next question about classes. Is there a benefit in using a classer for selecting for productivity?
Well, I think going on the MLP results, that the classes have shown that if you're interested, they were really quite successful when they were classing for the visual traits, and they performed well against the indexes where the visual traits had a significant input into the assumptions in that index. So yes, the MLP data is saying that, and the MLP data is saying that classes can class for lifetime productivity as well as how the progeny will perform. But it's also saying that when you have more complex breeding objectives, when you have an increasing number of non-visual traits, that then the measured performance is showing some advantage in terms of those breeding objectives, and when those non-visual traits are important to you.
Thank you. What was the breeding philosophy of the sires that increased in fleece value over time?
The sires that increased in fleece value over time tended to be a later maturing merino with that had advantages in fleece value, that they didn't express it necessarily at 8 or 9 months of age. They were a little bit later maturing, but they were able to then express it once they'd got to 20 months of age and then into adult age. So those were the ones that tended to increase in ranking.
Thank you. One here. I think you had a slide showing dag and worm resistance favourably correlated to resilience. Can you please clarify what you mean by resilience?
So in the resilience trial that was conducted with CSIRO at the New England site, the resilience trait was an assessment of how the animals at a young age responded to a vaccination. And so it was with complex measures, but how they responded to a vaccination was a measure of resilience. It has been used and is now commercially available in some of the cattle species through and it's even in genomic tests. So commercial heifer genomic tests are picking up the value here of these resilient traits. So it's quite a complex way in which the resilience trait was determined.
Thank you. Okay. Adult and ongoing data submissions to sheep genetics are problematic when only a few are retained each year. The rest of the management group are sold to commercial producers. How can we add to index data and confidence with low numbers, for example, 10 to 40 rams having greasy fleece weight, clean fleece weight, body weight, fibre diameter, etc., collected?
So there is value in doing the size, particularly when there's been, a significant part of the drop that has been tested as 1-year-old. So you pick up the value in testing size. But most of the value you get is picked up via testing the ewes at the adult ages. We're getting close to where a genomic test is equivalent to one bit of direct data. And so one of the reasons why we're looking to aggregate a lot of the information that we're collecting is because we might be getting to the point in 2026 is that genomics, the benefits of genomics are showing that a genomic test for hogget and adult fleece weight may be accurate enough to actually reduce the need to actually have a test at hogget and adult age. Now, this will depend on how well you're linked to the reference flock. It will depend on the accuracies that you have for that trait. But at one time, as genomics is getting better and better, there comes to a point where genomics will start substituting for some of the costs of collecting these traits on the farm. And now it's a delicate balance. It strongly relies on a really good reference population to do that. But I think that's where we're heading. And so one of the issues about, we've been saying two-stage selection, measure them as 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds. Now in the genomic era, that advice may evolve. And so that's part of the reason why we're leaving some of the advice to growers until 2026 when we've had a good look at this.
It's exciting. Okay. Where can I learn more about the impact of reproduction culling strategies for long-term flock productivity and improve repro?
Making more from sheep and a few of the reproduction workshops that Emily's involved in. So
I did not even write that myself, Geoff.
I'm a bit suspicious.
I didn't, I promise. That wasn't even me, but thanks for the plug.
Okay. Yeah. So there are resources around on that that can help, and Emily's a good spot for that.
Cool. I can pop some of those links in there as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we have some of this information about the benefit cost of using a professional sheep classer alone? And to who just asked that question, if I've got that wrong, please flick me another message. But yeah, can we have some of this information about the benefit cost of using a professional sheep classer alone?
Yeah, so the Stud Trust project with Anne is looking at the costs of visual assessment, the costs of measured assessments, and then looking at what benefits you then need to get to cover the additional or the reduced cost of either one or the other. So yes, we'll be collecting that information, and that's another stay tuned for 2026. Excellent.
Thank you. A question here, are the journal publications, the 25 that you mentioned have already come out, are they available at wool.com?
No, but I can look into that further.
Excellent.
And there's copyright issues there, so I'm not quite sure, but I'll investigate that and we can answer that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. We will, we know who asked that, so we can go back directly on that. Okay. The repeatability of individual traits measured as a young sheep, for example, at hogget age, over the sheep's lifetime could be very useful in predicting the outcome of a selection decision, index, stepwise or other, over the lifetime of a commercial flock. Is MLP publishing such repeatability values? And if so, in what form?
AGBU is currently working up the big genetic parameter information around all of these traits, and one of them will be looking at the correlations between the different ages of the traits, and so that's often pointing to how reliable, say, a yearling age measurement is at predicting what the hogget measurement will be. So that parameter data set is going to be very complex, and one of our jobs will be to delve into that quite complicated data set and pick out the key messages for growers. So that'll be a process that we'll be embarking on the latter half of this year, is how do we get some really complicated messages out in the right format and answering the questions that the growers are most interested in.
Excellent, thank you. There was a bit of a follow-up question there about what will be available before this year's ram selling season, but given the analysis is ongoing, we wouldn't expect anything to be out until 2026. Is that the message there?
So, I mean, what I've delivered in this webinar will obviously be out there, recorded. People will be able to access it. We'll have it
it's out there now.
Out there now. But, you know, a reasonable amount of what I've said, you know, is in Beyond the Bale, is in the podcasts. But we do need to package it up and make it in a usable, friendly, accessible manner, so you don't have to go delving through Beyond the Bales or whatever to get it. So that's our job, is to be able to, will be to package it up and to make all this information as accessible as possible.
Yes, and rest assured, don't worry, there's been a lot of discussions about that thus far, and they're ongoing. So we're proceeding with vigour towards that. Is AWI going to do MLP outcomes workshops? If yes, when and where?
So yes, we'll be holding a series of webinars. We're committed right at the start of the project to hold a seminar at each of the sites, or wherever the site committees so choose. So looking for one in WA, one in around Hamilton. Then we'll work with one at Armidale, look to see if we can combine the Macquarie and the Merino link. But we'll be working through with the site committees, and they're likely to be around this time, which is often the best time to have wool grower seminars of a genetic nature.
Yep.
So yeah, stay tuned for the pipeline and for 2026.
Yep, excellent. Geoff, I think you're almost there. Let me just check my list to make sure we haven't forgotten any. This is a good question, just following on from one of those earlier ones. Will the genetic parameters be available to the merino industry? Yes,
so we will be publishing that. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. That's
and then we'll have to be trying to. So yes, we'll be publishing in its entirety. But it's a very technical document. But then we'll then also be looking at how we then chunk that down into more bite-sizable bits. Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Given the recurring statements during the presentation about the ever-increasing importance of genomics in evaluation moving forward and its reliance on an industry ref population, are there internal discussions at AWI about investing capital back into the reference flock? MLA is carrying the weight of this expense, with much of the cost being transferred back to ram producers.
So there's an industry discussion about the value of the genomic resource flock. AWI has committed the SIRE evaluation, so we've got about 5,000 animals that have been measured to 2-year-old. Some of the AMSI sites are going into 1 or 2 years of reproduction. So yes, AWI has stumped up, and as the ram breeders who are entering animals in the site evaluation sites to collect the data on merinos to 2-year-old.
Excellent, thank you.
But there will be a need to coordinate this space as the value of this genomic data increases, and as the value of the genomic data becomes more universal in terms of it's just not a resource there for those in the ASBV system. You know, there's the genomic, there's the flock profiles, but there's the genomic breeding values that MRLA are releasing in the near future. So it'll be really interesting to see how industry takes that new product up, but it really does open up genomics to those who aren't accessing it at the moment.
Thank you. MLP is a massive project. What have we learnt from the MLP project about running large-scale and very long genetic research projects?
Well, I think quite a few of the dot points that I've already addressed. So I think one of the critical things is industry and engagement and involvement all the way through the project. So in its design phase, the development stage, the contracting stage, the oversight of the project, and then through to the extension. So I think you know, industry involvement is one of those really important attributes, but it's also then having a means by which you can then commercialise the outcomes of that R&D, and breeding values are a means whereby through all the updates and improving the analysis, there's quite a defined commercialisation path. There's quite a defined commercialisation path to those growers on farm. So there's around 1,000 stud merino breeders, and then there's ones who breed their own. So there's quite targeted ways that we can get the outcomes adopted.
Excellent. What's the next big genetics project for AWI?
Well, moving into how do we secure a good and vibrant and genetically current genomic resource flock is taking the focus at the moment. But there's likely also need to be more work in terms of feed intake and efficiency. We'll do the analysis and then see where we're needing to go next.
Thank you. Okay, last two on my ticket. Is there anything new in the MLP data coming out with regard to udder conformation and its relationship to rearing ability?
So yes, so Erin Smith, who is a PhD student, has looked at this at the New England site, and she's looked at udders and teats and the importance of those, the heritability of them, and so we have upgraded the visual scores to include teats and udder. Erin found that poor udders reduce weaning rate and reduce survival. So yeah, a fair amount of work has been done on the importance of udders.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, unless someone else gets in really quick, this is your last one, Geoff. Regarding the sheep classing results, for example, greasy fleece weight, fibre diameter, etc., has it been looked at what the outcomes would have been if the sale and cull animals had actually been culled? That is, how much re-ranking was there across the years?
So we haven't modelled that, but because we've collected the data for lifetime and all animals are in, bar mortality, and there were a few welfare culls, we've collected the lifetime data, so we can model that.
Mhm.
we can model it such that what happens if you culled these animals at this stage? What did that then do to the average per head production of the animals that are remaining? So that's possible with the data that we've collected.
Super, thank you. And just a one line, gosh. Okay, Amy Bell has written, in regards to the resilience project question, the resilience trait measured was immune competence, which is a general measure of an animal's ability to mount an immune response, which is linked to general disease resistance. More immune competent animals had lower WEC and DAG measurements, which is a favourable correlation. Just some
Great, thanks, Amy.
Extra flavour there from the researchers. Thank you very much. We do have a lot of the MLP researchers on here tonight, which is excellent. Oh, and Anne Ramsey has popped in and said, Tim, there is an updated udder analysis in the pipeline using data from all 5 sites. Stay tuned. Okay. Oh, and Jen Smith has just popped in and said, in regards to the udder traits, hopefully we'll have another paper for the Animal Production Science special issue journal as well. So excellent news for anyone particularly involved in udder conformation and traits there. Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll call that a day before Geoff gets any more questions, and we're almost bang up against time now. There's the majority of people have stuck on here right till the very end. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Geoff, for your presentation. And thank you everyone for your questions, both the questions that we got prior to the webinar and the ones that have come in now. I've learned a lot. I always learn something when Geoff's talking. So that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for attending.
So thank you very much, Geoff, again, for your presentation, and Megan Rogers very much for assisting in the background there with collating questions. If you're after more information in the meantime, please visit wool.com/MLP. Until next time, thank you all very much and have a great night.